Mariah Carey, the songbird supreme, the irreplaceable jewel of music history. A voice like liquid gold, a once-in-a-generation miracle that soared across 5 octaves and redefined what greatness in song could mean. She is not only the Queen of Christmas, the creator of the anthem that has conquered every December. Not only the record-breaking artist with more #1 hits than any other female singer in history. She is the heartbeat of modern pop, the fragile yet blazing star who has poured her soul into the soundtrack of millions of lives. In an industry overflowing with ego scandal and fleeting trends, Mariah shined differently. A woman who combined glamour with vulnerability, strength with fragility. She stood as the diva of divas, yet behind the diamonds and gowns was a human treasure marked by pain, resilience, and astonishing survival. For decades, her songs carried hope to strangers, while her dignity silenced critics who tried to reduce her to gossip. She was beauty, brilliance, and vulnerability embodied in one. She is living proof that one voice can unite the world, that music can heal wounds we cannot even name. And yet, behind the eternal glory, behind the smile that lit up Madison Square Garden and the charts of Billboard, lie scars that never truly closed. Cold nights of loneliness, broken bonds of family, the weight of betrayals and losses that cling to her like shadows refusing to let go. Now at 56, the woman once hailed as untouchable faces some of the darkest chapters of her story, where grief and fading health collide with haunting memories, and where the price of fame grows heavier than ever. Do not turn away, for what Mariah endures now may be the most heartbreaking truth of her life. The first wounds of Mariah Carey were not written by the glare of cameras or the pressure of Billboard charts, but by childhood itself. A home divided, a family fractured, and a little girl learning far too soon that love could vanish without warning. Before the world knew her as the songbird supreme, she was only Mariah, a child navigating a storm that had no intermission. Mariah Carey entered the world on March 27, 1969, in Huntington, Long Island. Even her name carried a lyricism that promised light, but her early life was smothered by turbulence. Her father, Alfred Roy Carey, of African-American and Afro-Venezuelan descent, and her mother, Patricia, an Irish-American opera singer and vocal coach, were already drifting apart when she was born. Within 3 years, their marriage collapsed, and the memory of her father would live more in absence than in presence. He faded from the picture, leaving Mariah with shadows where stability should have stood. Patricia shouldered the burden of survival, moving her children through constant upheaval. 13 homes before Mariah even finished high school, each address a reminder that nothing was permanent. In every new town, every new school, she felt the weight of being different. Too light for one world, too dark for another. She grew up in the crossfire of race and poverty, a girl without a steady sanctuary. She would later admit in her memoir that she felt like an outsider in my own family, caught between cultures belonging to none. Home itself was not refuge. There were violent family fights, times when police lights flashed against the windows, moments when fear seemed louder than lullabies. Her siblings grew distant, relationships strained by resentment and survival. One sister, Allison, would drift into a troubled life that left scars between them. What should have been bonds of blood became fractures that widened with every passing year. School offered no escape. Teachers mistook her daydreams for defiance. Classmates ridiculed her mixed heritage. And yet, she clung to the one gift that no one could take away: her voice. Alone in her room, she practiced scales, hiding pain in melodies. At a piano or in front of a bathroom mirror, she discovered her only sanctuary. Music became the house that never moved the family that never turned its back. By the time she reached her teens, Mariah had endured what might shatter adults: the silence of an absent father, the chaos of a mother trying to survive the sting of racial isolation, the ache of fractured sibling bonds, and the heartbreak of never feeling at home in her own home. It was a cruel apprenticeship in grief, teaching her that joy could be temporary and security always uncertain. And yet those wounds did not break her. They forged her. An absent father gave her empathy for the abandoned. Constant moving taught her resilience. Loneliness gave her a pen and a melody shaping lyrics that would one day touch millions. Childhood was not a preface to her greatness. It was the furnace where pain and perseverance collided, melting into the voice that the world would never forget. When the silence of her fractured childhood threatened to swallow her, Mariah Carey did not surrender. Instead, melodies began to whisper, and a girl who had lost so much discovered that music could become her only refuge. What she did not yet know was that this fragile dream would demand not only talent, but the same hunger and endurance that had already defined her young life. By the time she walked away from high school, juggling part-time jobs and unfinished notebooks of lyrics, she had already decided that performance would be her salvation. Her voice was both gift and burden. Those glass-shattering notes born from nodules on her vocal cords were at first obstacles, but she turned them into miracles. Night after night, she wrote songs by candlelight, recorded rough demos in small studios, and handed out tapes that carried not just music, but survival itself. These were not glamorous beginnings. They were survival wages for a girl who had already made survival her second skin. Armed with little more than a demo cassette, a restless determination, and a dream too big for Long Island, Mariah pushed into New York City, chasing a fragile hope. She lived modestly stretched every dollar and trusted her voice to open doors that rarely unlocked for outsiders. Then, a flicker of recognition. When Brenda K. Starr, a friend and fellow singer, passed Mariah's demo tape to executives at Columbia Records, fate intervened. At a party in 1988, the cassette landed in the hands of Tommy Mottola, Columbia's powerful executive, who was so struck by what he heard that he turned his car around to find the girl behind the voice. It was the cinematic twist every dreamer imagines, but for Mariah, it was no accident. It was the consequence of years of sacrifice. Soon after she signed with Columbia, and in 1990, her self-titled debut album was released. The world listened and the world bowed. Singles like Vision of Love did not just climb charts, they announced the arrival of something otherworldly. Critics marveled at the maturity in her tone, the range that spanned 5 octaves, the rare ability to mix vulnerability with power. She was no longer the shy girl from broken homes. She was the new hope of pop. But triumph carried its shadows. Behind the spotlight, Mariah found herself under the control of the very man who had given her the contract. Tommy Mottola became her husband, and her jailer, both mentor and warden. Years later, she would describe that marriage as a golden cage, where freedom was replaced by constant surveillance. What looked like fairy tale beginnings to the world felt to her like another form of confinement. Still, in those lean years, in the endless rehearsals, in the tight grip of a controlling industry, Mariah was proving something greater than fame. She was building endurance. The same resilience that had carried her through absent fathers, fractured homes, and lonely nights was now carrying her through the unforgiving gates of the music business. The girl who had once hidden in notebooks and empty bedrooms had learned to carry her true home inside herself. Persistence, humility, and an unshakable refusal to quit. The world had not yet crowned her the Queen of Christmas or the Diva of Divas, but she had already revealed the truth that mattered most. She would not break. Mariah Carey entered the 1990s not as the industry's golden child, but as its fragile outsider. A young woman with no dynasty behind her, no powerful family to open doors, only a voice too immense to ignore. And yet, the moment she sang, the world understood it was hearing something it might never hear again. With her debut album in 1990, she did not simply climb charts, she redefined them. Vision of Love soared to #1 and became both her anthem and her prophecy. It was the first glimpse of her paradox, glamour, and fragility triumph, wrapped around wounds still healing. The tide surged with impossible speed. In just a few years, she achieved 5 consecutive #1 singles, a feat unmatched, and critics hailed her as the new Queen of Pop. By the time Music Box arrived in 1993, selling over 28 million copies worldwide, she was no longer a rising star. She was an empire. And yet, behind the diamond records and glimmering gowns, there was always the shadow of the cage. Her marriage to Tommy Mottola, the Sony executive who discovered her, seemed to the world like a fairy tale. But inside, she would later admit it felt like captivity. Every decision monitored, every step observed. Success and surveillance walked hand in hand. The cost of fame grew sharper. When she pushed back, choosing music that reflected her own identity rather than industry formulas, the whispers began. Reckless, ungrateful, too ambitious. Sharp labels clung to her as unforgiving as the spotlight itself. Albums like Daydream in 1995 proved them wrong, unleashing Fantasy and One Sweet Day songs that conquered not only the charts, but history. One Sweet Day stayed atop the Billboard Hot 100 for 16 weeks, a record untouched for decades. Still, the applause carried its shadows. And then came 2001, when the storm broke. The film Glitter and its accompanying soundtrack were savaged by critics, a commercial disaster that played out like a public unraveling. Exhaustion caught up and Mariah collapsed physically and emotionally. Her breakdown splashed across tabloids with cruel delight. For an artist who had once seemed untouchable, it was a devastating crucible. Yet she did not vanish. Like Keanu with Neo, Mariah found her own resurrection. In 2005, the emancipation of Mimi arrived like lightning, reclaiming her crown. Songs like We Belong Together became instant classics, returning her to the very top of the charts. But the comeback was not gentle, it was carved from scars. Each note was infused with pain, endured each lyric proof that fragility could transform into strength. For Mariah, Carey Glory has never been free. Every #1 hit carried the price of sleepless nights, of a body and spirit stretched to breaking of critics who doubted her resilience. The world saw the gowns, the Christmas lights, the dazzling stages. But behind the curtain was a woman who paid for every ovation with solitude, scrutiny, and scars no spotlight could erase. And just as she stood highest, the shadows of private tragedy were already waiting, ready to remind her that even the brightest voice could not drown out grief. Mariah Carey has always been described as elusive, but nowhere is that more true than in the story of her heart. Her romantic life was never the glittering carousel of fairy tales that the tabloids love to imagine. Instead, it was a path of tender beginnings, whispered betrayals and heartbreaks that would carve scars deeper than any ovation could ever heal. Behind the glamour and the gowns was a woman who longed for something simpler, love that would not vanish. Her first true relationship of global scrutiny came with Tommy Mottola, the powerful Sony executive who discovered her demo tape and opened the gates to fame. To the world, their marriage in 1993 looked like destiny. Cinderella wedded to her prince, the struggling girl transformed into a queen. But for Mariah, the castle was a cage. Years later, she would describe it as Sing Sing, a prison where every phone call was monitored, every step shadowed. The man who had given her success had also taken her freedom, and the home she built became a gilded cell. By 1998, she broke free, leaving the marriage, but carrying scars of control that would haunt her for decades. Love after that was complicated. There were brief romances with athletes and actors, fleeting tabloid whispers, and constant scrutiny that made intimacy feel impossible. In 2008, she married Nick Cannon, and for a moment it seemed she had found the family she had been denied in childhood. Their twins, Moroccan and Monroe, born in 2011, were her miracle. But the union crumbled, and in 2016, the divorce became official. Though she rarely spoke of the heartbreak, insiders recalled the tension, the separations, the way love again dissolved, despite her desperate hope for permanence. And then came losses that no stage could ever eclipse. In 2008, during an appearance on The Ellen DeGeneres Show, she was pressured to hint at a pregnancy. Days later, she suffered a miscarriage in silence. What should have been joy became grief carried in the shadows, proof, once again, that even her body conspired against her fragile dreams of home. Yet the deepest wounds came not from lovers, but from family. Her relationship with her siblings disintegrated into lawsuits, betrayals, and bitterness. Her brother Morgan accused her of abandonment. Her sister Allison filed lawsuits claiming defamation. The woman who gave the world anthems of hope often faced daggers from her own blood. The pain reached its cruelest point in 2024 when both her mother Patricia and her estranged sister Allison died on the very same day. Patricia's passing carried both reconciliation and relief. Mariah was able to sit by her side in her final hours and hear words she described as healing. But Allison's death was another story, one wrapped in guilt. They had been estranged for years, and Mariah admitted quietly that she had not seen her sister before the end. That loss, unhealed and unfinished, left a scar deeper than any courtroom battle or tabloid headline. For Mariah, grief was never a storm that passed. It became a companion reshaping itself into silence, into distance, into the haunted look that sometimes slipped through even in her brightest performances. Her tragedies were not just another chapter in a celebrity story. They were the crucibles that carved her humanity. The miscarriages, the failed marriages, the fractured siblings, the deaths that came too soon, all of it folded into the gentleness she extended to her children, to her fans, to strangers who found solace in her songs. In carrying her losses, Mariah Carey became more than a singer. She became a vessel of survival, a woman whose heartbreak translated into the ballads that made millions weep. Behind the glitter, she remained a fragile soul who had endured love, stolen family broken, and time itself cutting wounds that never closed. It was not the trophies or the charts that defined her. It was the scars and the courage to keep singing through them. Life had never been gentle with her, and it would not soften now. This time, fate's cruelty came not in the thunder of headlines, but as a slow, merciless erosion within her own family. In August 2024, two losses struck on the very same day: her mother Patricia and her estranged sister Allison. For Mariah Carey, it was not simply grief. It was the collapse of two worlds, at once one reconciled only at the final hour, the other forever unfinished. On stage, the world still saw her as the radiant diva, the indestructible songbird supreme, who could lift a stadium with a single note. Offstage, she was a daughter by a hospital bed, listening to her mother's fading voice, taking in words that she would later call healing. And then she was a sister, paralyzed by the news that Allison had passed without a farewell. The contrast was unbearable. On one side, fans screamed her name as Christmas lights crowned her queen again. On the other, she whispered regrets into the silence of a relationship never mended. Those who knew her recall the small acts that revealed the depth of her devotion. How she rearranged schedules to be present in Patricia's last days. How she confided to friends that she wished Allison could have heard her forgiveness. How despite the fractures and lawsuits that had scarred the family name, she still carried guilt heavy enough to shadow her triumphs. The agony of helplessness etched itself into her, a mark no award or ovation could erase. This was grief in its slowest, cruelest form, watching those you love vanish in ways you cannot stop realizing that all the money, all the fame, all the devotion in the world cannot turn back time. And yet from this crucible of sorrow, another legacy emerged. Mariah quietly increased her support of children's charities, schools, and medical organizations. She lent her name to campaigns for children in need donated to Black Lives Matter and the Fresh Air Fund, and launched her own Camp Mariah to give underprivileged kids a chance at dreams bigger than their circumstances. She never sought applause for it. For her, it was gratitude, whispered thanks to the life music had given her, and a vow to spare other families the helplessness she had endured. But some wounds arrive not slowly, but all at once. For Mariah, the breakdown of 2001 was such a night. Exhaustion, betrayal, and public ridicule collided into a collapse that landed her in the hospital. The woman once hailed as untouchable was suddenly fragile, mocked for what was in truth a cry for help. She carried that scar long after the tabloids stopped laughing, and it colored every performance that came after. Her fans may have cheered her comeback, but inside, she knew the cost. Every triumph in her career after that point was haunted by shadows, the absence of her father, Alfred, who died of cancer in 2002, the betrayal of siblings who turned lawsuits into weapons, the regret of unfinished reconciliations. Yet, as with Keanu Reeves carrying River Phoenix's ghost, Mariah carried her grief into song. When critics praised the raw sorrow in her ballads, they were hearing more than performance. They were hearing the silence of empty chairs at family tables, the ache of voices gone. And still, grief did not consume her. She turned it into something else, into music, into philanthropy, into a resilience that would outlive even the cruelest headlines. To audiences, her story became proof that even the deepest wounds borne quietly and with dignity can transform pain into compassion and loss into a legacy greater than fame itself. The voice, like the heart, has limits. For Mariah Carey, every note that once soared effortlessly into the heavens has also carved wounds deeper into her body and soul until pain itself became her most unrelenting companion. The applause faded, the lights dimmed, but the toll remained etched into her throat, her spirit, her frame. The world worshipped the myth of the indestructible diva who could sing 5 octaves as if gravity did not exist. What it never saw was the woman stepping off stage, clutching her chest, protecting a voice stitched together by years of relentless strain. Silence masking the torment of a body, pushed beyond forgiveness. It began in her early 20s when Columbia demanded not only brilliance, but perfection. Endless rehearsals, back-to-back tours, sleepless nights spent recording, until dawn, she surrendered her body to the machinery of fame. Nodules formed on her vocal cords, a cruel twist of fate for the girl who had built her identity around song. Doctors warned her that her instrument could be lost forever. Most would have surrendered. Mariah did not. She learned to bend her voice around the nodules, transforming what should have been a weakness into her signature, the whispery high notes that became her trademark. On stage, she bent sound into miracles. Off stage, she bent herself into pain. Each performance was not only triumph, but defiance proof that she would not be silenced. But fame is merciless, and the cost only grew heavier. By the late 90s, when the glitter of awards should have sheltered her, the walls began to crack. In 2001, exhaustion collided with betrayal, and she collapsed in a hotel suite, an emotional and physical breakdown that tabloids treated as spectacle. The woman who had once seemed untouchable was suddenly mocked as fragile, unstable. She would later confess that she had been hospitalized against her will, treated less like a patient than a headline. Her heart wanted to keep singing, but her mind was drowning. Yet instead of cursing the world, she adapted. She traded sleepless obsession for gentler rituals. She began to speak openly about bipolar disorder, turning her illness from stigma into survival. It was humility in its purest form to admit fragility without surrendering spirit. Fans who have seen her in recent years notice the subtle changes the way she paces herself on stage, the careful lowering of a note instead of chasing the impossible high, the brief wince hidden behind a smile. These are not signs of weakness, but living proof that every triumph has been bought with sacrifice. To audiences, she remains bulletproof, the voice of Christmas, the empress of ballads. But if you look closer, the truth whispers through every pause, every lowered glance, every breath that seems to carry weight. Mariah Carey has paid for every ovation with flesh and spirit. Each #1 single has cost her nights in silence, mornings where pain lingered in her throat, whispered prayers that her voice would last one more tour, one more Christmas season. Glory for her has never been free. It has been bought moment by moment, scar by scar, heartbreak by heartbreak. And still, she carries it. Just as she has carried grief, she carries pain quietly, without complaint. Never as spectacle, but always as choice. Her silence is not emptiness, but resilience. The calm of a woman who refuses to let suffering define her. The diva who once seemed untouchable now bends herself toward survival. At 56, her health bears the undeniable marks of time and sacrifice. The vocal cords worn and reshaped, the body softened by decades of strain, the spirit tested by breakdowns and betrayals. And yet, those very marks are what make her extraordinary. They are not the end of her legend, but the proof of it. For fans, this truth is both devastating and uplifting. To watch her now is to see not just a singer, but a warrior of endurance. A woman who has turned frailty into strength scars, into symbols, and every weary note into proof of what it means to give everything for art. Each ballad, each breath, each Christmas anthem is not weakness. It is a monument to devotion, to resilience, to the unyielding spirit of Mariah Carey. Now, having crossed the threshold of midlife, Mariah no longer seeks only the roar of stadiums or the glare of awards shows to measure her worth. The woman who once battled for every chart position has carved out a different kind of stage. One without critics, without contracts, without the endless hunger of executives. Her sanctuary lies in the quiet of her home, surrounded by her twins, Moroccan and Monroe. Here she is not a diva, but a mother, She cooks, she laughs, she sings lullabies instead of power ballads. She has built her own temple of calm, a place where the ghosts of family loss can soften, and where the body can finally breathe. And yet peace does not mean stillness. Mariah continues to work, though never on the industry's merciless schedule. She records, selectively lends her voice to projects that resonate with her heart, and protects her annual Christmas reign as if it were both crown and lifeline. Beyond music, she stretches into philanthropy, her Camp Mariah, her support for children's charities, her quiet donations to families in need. She does not seek applause for it. These are not staged for cameras. They are the ordinary outpourings of a woman who has carried grief and chosen again and again to transmute it into kindness. This is the alchemy of Mariah Carey: to turn loss into empathy, to transform silence into song. Her philosophy is not written in manifestos, but in melodies. Grief changes shape, but it never ends, she once said, and her voice carries that truth in every performance. Instead of hiding from pain, she has allowed it to soften her, to make her gentler, more generous. The music industry has known singers brighter, louder, wealthier. Few, however, have carried sorrow with such humility and turned it into a force that uplifts others. Perhaps that is the truest definition of greatness. Not how many records are sold, not how many trophies line the shelves, but how gently one stands when the climb is over. For Mariah Carey, the legend is not only in the notes sustained or the charts conquered. It is in the way she mothers her children, in the way she smiles quietly, despite exhaustion, in the way she endures the shadows and still sings of light. She has given everything to art, and at last, she has given herself permission to heal. In the end, Mariah Carey's story is not only the story of a singer, but of a woman who has lived through storms and chosen to walk gently through what remained. She has shown us that greatness is not measured in fame or fortune, but in the quiet choices, the choice to be kind, when no one is watching, the choice to endure, without bitterness, the choice to turn wounds into wisdom and scars into compassion. Perhaps that is why audiences across generations feel so deeply connected to her, because in Mariah we see something of ourselves, our own grief, our own search for meaning, our own longing for peace after chaos. Her home may be her sanctuary, but the lesson it holds belongs to us all, that even after the darkest nights, the morning light will always return. And now, the question belongs to you. Do you want Mariah Carey to keep defying the stage, carrying her voice into another decade of triumphs? Or do you hope she chooses to slow down and protect the health that has already carried so much? Has her quiet confession that grief changes shape but never ends ever touched your own life? Perhaps reminding you of someone you loved and lost. If her journey has spoken to you, leave your reflections below. Share a memory, a thought, a wish for the woman who has given us so much. And if you believe, as we do, that stories like hers should be remembered, cherished, and passed on, join us in honoring lives that prove resilience and compassion can shine brighter than fame itself.